Hello. Hello, please. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Go and feed our pheasants. We've come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. The following newspaper article comes from the 9th of December 1995 with the headline, High Life of Flash Tony. Neighbours of victim Tony Tucker were baffled at how he could afford a £250,000 home and a string of flash motors with no visible means of support. They suspected he was a shady character, but had no idea that he had amassed a fortune from his years at the heart of the Essex underworld. His murder stunned residents in the village of Fobbing, where the gangster owned a hacienda-style bungalow with breathtaking views across open farmland. Tucker's palatial red brick home boasts its own stables. In the front garden is a statue of a naked goddess and Greek urns adorn the front wall. Tucker had a separate garage block for the luxury motors which were often spotted in his drive. These included at least one Mercedes. Neighbours said the drug baron had only recently moved into the house. Tucker appeared paranoid about security. He had an elaborate wall built and iron gates installed to block access to the front of the property. A sophisticated video intercom system was also fitted to vet callers, and after dark, guard dogs patrolled the ground. The detective leading the murder hunt said that Tucker had good reason to fear for his safety. Chief Superintendent Ivan Dibley said of the 3 victims, these men had been involved with a sort of criminality where it is likely that their lives have been threatened before. Post-mortem examinations were being carried out on the bodies yesterday at Broomfield Hospital, Chelmsford. Mr. Dibley appealed for more information from the public. He said, quote, I'd particularly like to hear from anyone who saw a vehicle leaving the farm track at White House Farm, or anybody who saw someone thumbing a lift on the A130, which runs past the farm at the relevant time. Mr. Dibley confirmed that the 3 men arrested on Thursday on suspicion of being connected with the shootings had been released without charge. The next article comes from the same date, the 9th of December 1995, with the headline, Gun Deaths No Leah Link. The detective leading the hunt for the killer who shot 3 men on an isolated Essex farm track last night dismissed rumours of a link with the Leah Betts tragedy. Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley of Essex Police confirmed that all 3 were quite high up in the drug-dealing hierarchy, but warned that speculation on a link with Leah's death might hinder the investigation. Last night, police were continuing to hunt for clues with a fingertip search of the area surrounding the crime scene at White House Farm, Rettendon, near the A130 Chelmsford to Southend Road. The bodies of Craig Rolfe, Patrick Tate and Anthony Tucker were found at around 8 AM on Thursday, slumped in a Range Rover on the snow-covered farm track. Donna Jaggers, Rolfe's girlfriend of 7 years and the mother of his 6-year-old child, appealed for people to help catch the killer or killers. She wept as she pleaded, I would just like anyone who was with them, who knows anything about what happened or if they saw anything, to just come forward. Police had earlier visited the parents of Leah Betts, the 18-year-old who died after taking ecstasy, to keep them abreast of developments. But after intense media speculation that the triple killing might be linked with Leah's death, Detective Superintendent Dibley said, at this moment in time, there is nothing to suggest that these men distributed drugs to Leah Betts or her associates. All 3 men, he said, were well known to the police, having been convicted of armed robbery, vehicle theft and other offences. And although none of them had been convicted for drug offences, all were known to be quite high up in dealing in all kinds of substances. Detective Superintendent Dibley said, police could well be looking for more than one killer. But last night a weapons expert confirmed that spent shotgun cartridges found at the scene had all come from the same gun. There could be a power struggle, or there could be a double cross which has taken place. Detective Superintendent Dibley added, it might be that someone has owed money, but hasn't paid their bill. He said Rolfe was last seen at 6 PM the evening before the bodies were found. He had failed to meet Miss Jaggers for a meal 2 hours later. fueling speculation that the men were killed on Wednesday evening. Okay, so an incredibly important piece of information to talk about regarding this article. Now, bearing in mind, this article was published on the 9th of December, so 48 hours after the bodies of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were discovered. Now, already, just 2 days after that discovery of the bodies, a weapons expert, a ballistic expert, has deciphered that only one weapon was used to kill Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. Now, this is one of the bigger sticking points for me in this entire investigation, because it's falsely peddled and pushed out there in various books or documentaries that Michael Steele fires his own gun. He fires a shot into one of these victims, at least one shot into these victims. His gun then falls apart. Jack Womes has his own separate shotgun, during which time he is also shooting the individuals in this car, telling us quite clearly and falsely that 2 shotguns were used in this crime. Now, let me make this crystal clear to you, because it's absolutely imperative that you understand what has been falsely put out there in these books and documentaries regarding the use of 2 shotguns in this crime. It is stated in these books and documentaries that Michael Steele discharges his weapon, shooting at least one of these individuals before the gun falls apart. It is never said that Michael Steele clicks the trigger on the first occasion and that gun then jams and falls apart, leaving only one shotgun to kill all 3 individuals. It's always falsely claimed that Michael Steele has shot one of these individuals before that gun falls apart. Now, the reason it's falsely claimed in these documentaries that the gun fell apart during the execution or after he had fired at least one shot into the victims is because this is exactly what Darren Nichols said during his statement under oath. It clearly states here, Jack said, yeah, it was quite funny because when Mick had shot one of them, the gun fell apart. Now, this is where it comes from. This is where this information arises from. Darren Nichols' own version of events, of Michael Steele discharging his weapon and then it falling apart. Now, if you need further clarification that only one shotgun was used for this entire murder, take a look at the summing up in court document where the ballistic expert states the following. All 7 cartridge cases had been fired using the same weapon, probably a pump or self-loading gun having a large capacity magazine. He could not discount the use of a gun with a lesser magazine capacity that would have required reloading. And I guess whilst we're on the topic of false information, it's probably best to look at the rear near side smashed window. Now, in recent documentaries, it's been surmised, or it's been stated actually as a fact, that Tate, in fear, smashes the rear window with his fist or some part of his body because he's trying to escape from the vehicle. Now, that's completely false. When we look at the summing up in court document again, the sample of hair from Tate, the backseat passenger, indicated that the shots which caused the injury to his head, the actual injury, had actually passed through the glass prior to causing the injury. The only broken glass was, of course, on the near side rear. Now, further on in that document, it talks about fragments of glass being found in his hair. That's how they knew that the bullet passed through the glass. And also, there was no marks, no scratches, no scuffs on his hands, which you would have expected to have seen if he had smashed that window with his bare fists. This sort of information is put out there factually, really just to make the story sound a bit more interesting. You know, Tate in a pure panic smashes the rear window, making a feeble attempt at escape. It's completely false. This window was smashed because it was shot through into Tate's head. Now, putting the documentaries, books and films to one side for a moment, for me personally, the most concerning point regarding the use of 1 or 2 shotguns is the fact that Darren Nichols clearly states, and he's never changed this version of events, he clearly states that 2 shotguns were fired in these executions. Yet never during the police investigation, the police interviews, is Darren Nichols ever pulled up on this fact. He's never asked, well, there's only 1 shotgun being used in this crime, Darren. Why would Michael Steele say that he fired a weapon when he couldn't have possibly have done so? Because Jack Womes is also there with his shotgun, shooting the individuals as well. Not once is it ever put to Darren Nichols that this point of his story absolutely makes no credible sense whatsoever. Now, I could maybe understand if the police didn't get this information until months later in the investigation, But clearly in this article here, December the 9th, 2 days after the bodies are discovered, they're given the information by the forensic experts that only one gun fired these rounds, yet they're still looking at potentially more than one gunman. The next newspaper article comes from the 11th of December 1995, with the headline, "Police warn of gang war after drug murders." Police investigating the murder of 3 drug dealers on a remote Essex farm track fear more violence could erupt as rival gangs try to move into the area. Yesterday, as further details emerged of the criminal careers of the 3 victims, Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley warned that the murders could trigger a turf war. "I know that when 3 people who are involved in drug dealing are taken from the scene, somebody will try to fill the void that is created," he said. "I anticipate because of that there will be a power struggle taking place and potentially there could be more violence." The dead men, Craig Rolfe, 26, Patrick Tate, 37 and Tony Tucker, 38, all from the Basildon area, had been involved in a range of crimes from petty theft to armed robbery. But recent intelligence had shown that they were moving into the drugs trade as wholesalers rather than street traders. They were, said Mr. Dibley, quite high up on the drug dealing hierarchy, peddling the complete range of illegal narcotics. However, Mr. Dibley ruled out any direct connection with Leah Betts, the teenager who died after buying an ecstasy tablet at a Basildon nightclub. There has been a lot of speculation that the killings are linked with the tragic death of Leah Betts. This is pure speculation. There is nothing to link these 3 men with Leah's death, and this suggestion may well divert attention from the real investigation. Mr. Dibley said that the men had been threatened. Quote, "The drugs world is a very murky world. There has been so much publicity in recent weeks. It is clearly easy money, and it is known that there are power struggles among dealers. Police are unclear why the men were murdered. One theory is that they were killed by a rival gang trying to prevent them muscling in on a lucrative trade. Quote, there are no signs that any attempt was made to escape from the car. These people were more than street dealers, and it may be that others were trying to prevent them getting into a greater position of power." An alternative police theory was that the deaths of the 3 men who worked together were linked to an unpaid debt. The post-mortem examination results confirmed that the 3 men were killed with a shotgun. 7 cartridges were found in the snow close to the car. Rolfe, who was in the driver's seat of his Range Rover, and Tucker, who was sitting alongside him, were both shot in the head. Tate, who was in the back seat, died of multiple gunshot wounds. Police are not sure whether the killer arrived in the Range Rover with his victims and if he had an accomplice. Mr. Dibley, who said that there was no evidence of a struggle in the car, said, "I suspect that these shootings were carried out very quickly. There are no signs that any attempt was made to escape from the car." The post-mortem examination, which was carried out more than 24 hours after the bodies were found at the remote track in Rettendon, was unable to confirm the time of death. But Mr. Dibley said Rolfe failed to make a rendezvous with his girlfriend Donna Jaggers at 6 p.m. on Wednesday. Okay, so just a couple of things to pick up on regarding this article. The first thing I guess to mention is the new intelligence they'd received that these individuals were entering the drugs market as wholesalers, not just simple street dealers, and the mentioning of an unpaid debt. Now, we know about the dud cannabis deal, the money borrowed from certain people, but what I find most interesting is this is appearing in tabloid papers just a few days after these bodies were discovered. Now, I do wonder sometimes exactly what Tucker's next move would have been had he not been killed on December the 6th. Did they plan eventually to cut steel out of the importation situation, therefore raising their own personal profits on all the deals? Were they going to find some way of importing these drugs themselves? Because I guess that's the impression that we get, isn't it, of these 3 individuals. They're money hungry, they're greedy, they're kind of ruthless. Now, would that have been picked up on by the bigger suppliers, the bigger wholesalers in London regarding their sort of quick expansion into not just street dealing, but now wholesaling these drugs? Was the next plan, the next step up on the ladder for Tucker to actually import these drugs himself? The next newspaper article comes from the 14th of December 1995, with the headline, "Fears of Reprisal on Drug Killings." A top Essex detective warned yesterday that there could be reprisals after the slaughter of 3 suspected drug dealers. Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley said after the inquest opened on the 3 men, "I think there is a real chance that there could be repercussions. The killings had left a vacuum in the drugs distribution network in the county. It will be filled very quickly because there is big money to be made. Mr. Dibley said, "I believe the criminal fraternity in Essex are now looking over their shoulders." Regarding the weapon that was used in these killings, Mr. Dibley said that the gun would have been only 6 inches away from each man when it was fired. The weapon has not been found, and he admitted the chances of finding it was slim. "We are now in contact with other forces who have had drug-related killings," he said. "Certainly nowhere else in this country has seen 3 people killed in this way." Detectives believe that whoever killed the 3 was in the Range Rover with them. Mr. Dibley said that the killer must have been very cool to act the way he did. It was likely that a second vehicle, driven by an accomplice, must have been near the scene. At the inquest, which was opened and adjourned to a date to be fixed, Coroner's Officer PC Derek Seal said that all 3 men had been identified by fingerprints. Mr. Dibley said that the shots had been fired very quickly. It is believed that each of the victims was shot once, and then the killer fired again to finish them off. At the inquest, Coroner Dr. Malcolm Weir said, "Although the victims were somewhat unsavoury, they were human." Mr. Dibley said, "We are going all out to identify the person responsible. A lot of people would say that nobody's going to miss them, but the person who has done this to these 3 men in some ways is worse than them. Society demands that I investigate this as thoroughly as possible to bring whoever is responsible to justice." Okay, so just one point that I wish to make regarding this article, and it's something that just makes me feel a bit uneasy when I read it for some reason. Now, we've gone through quite a few articles, many of which are from the day after the bodies were discovered. Some articles were from 2 days after the bodies were discovered. And already there we're talking about a gunman, a potential accomplice with a car parked nearby, etc. But now we're 1 week into the investigation, and eerily, the lead detective, Detective Inspector Ivan Dibley, has come out and said that he believes that whoever committed this crime travelled down there in the Range Rover, which Michael Steele supposedly did. He had an accomplice, which Jack Wome supposedly was. And we also have a third person parked nearby in a getaway vehicle, which I guess was supposedly Darren Nichols. Now, we're 7 days into this investigation, and already we have exactly how it actually panned out with Jack Wome's Michael Steele and Darren Nichols being described here in this newspaper article. Now, bear in mind, the forensic evidence that we have at this stage, the ballistic evidence we have at this stage, is that 1 shotgun was used, we have no footprints entering or exiting the crime scene, and no tyre tracks. Yet the way that the investigation is going, or the direction that it's heading in, is that we have a possible person travelling down there in the Range Rover with the victims, we have an accomplice waiting down the lane, and someone else parked in a getaway vehicle nearby. Does that ballistic and forensic evidence point to that as the most likely possibility? Many thanks for joining me in this episode. I look forward to seeing you again for the next video. You should be able to see in front of you very shortly some other videos from the channel, and also the Essex Boys playlist, which has all of the videos concerning this case in one convenient folder. I look forward to seeing you again in the next one. Take care. Cheers.